Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just have a comment before we get started here with regards to the EPA not showing up today. I'm very sorry that did not happen. I think their lack of attendance shows a lack of respect for this committee and the process that we as congressmen and as this Congress have for an oversight. I also think it disrespects our panel, who they need to hear from. If they're going to promulgate rules and impact your lives and your businesses, they need to hear from your side so that they understand, have a better understanding of what their rules have as far as consequences. So I'm very disappointed. With that being said, that's not unusual. That's what that group. They don't want to listen to anything that happens in the private sector. They have their own mindset, and off they go. Mr. Kezar, thank you for coming today. Quickly, you live in a state that's expanding dramatically economically, and obviously there's going to be tremendous increased energy needs. How do you anticipate meeting those energy needs with this kind of restriction, unable to expand with coal-fired plant? Are you going to continue to do this? Or are you going to build a natural gas plant next to the other one, or what's your plans?
The location, well, that's a broad question, so let me deal with maybe the first part a little differently. As you are probably aware, the state of Texas is dealing right now with issues regarding the increased demand for energy within the state. As you know, ERCOT has an energy-only market, which doesn't necessarily tend to incent new construction of generation facilities. So the state right now has been grappling both at the legislative level and within the Reliability Council on how to incent new generation. And it's an uncertain market right now. I'll just put it that way. From our perspective, it's very difficult to envision the construction of a gas-fired power plant where we're located. The plant is situated at the mine. I mean, we are where we are because that's where the fuel source is. And we are physically dislocated from the major load demand requirements of our two customers. And so a gas-fired plant would be more likely built closer to those higher load demand centers than at the mine location itself.
What do you anticipate your increased costs to be able to comply with the EPA new regs and rules in order to be able to expand and meet your customers' needs?
Are you speaking about the greenhouse gas regulations?
Yeah.
Well, if the requirement for existing facilities mirrors the requirements that were contained in the new source proposed rule, and that's the rule that was proposed in April of 2012, we couldn't meet those requirements. There is not technology commercially available that would allow us to meet the emissions requirements that were contained within that proposal.
That's a great point. Appreciate you bringing that out. Mr. Brown, in your testimony you said that 40% of the cost of production of recastings is energy. I have a company in my district actually who got the #1 award for the casting of the year last year, and so I've toured their plant. I know what you do. Appreciate what you do. I did some quick calculations here. And if we, because of where you live, my state's very similar to yours, and about 85% of the energy that we get is produced from coal. So I would assume that I think other testimony said anywhere from 30 to 80% of the increased cost as a result of going to something else. If you had to go to natural gas, you would raise your cost of operation roughly 14%. From 40%, or excuse me, your energy costs would go from 40% to 54% of your total budget. What's your? Don't have to tell me how much money you make, but what's your spread? Is it less than 14%?
It's definitely less than 14%.
So in other words, you're going to go out of business if you can't raise the cost of the production of your product to be able to put a margin back in there to cover not only the cost of the electricity, but also something that you can go to the bank with and keep everybody.
And that's 100% true. I mean, we have to have a higher margin to be able to invest in for future growth and better electric and everything else. And being a small business, we do have small margins.
I'm running out of time here, so Dr. Weinstein, thank you for your comments as well. Can you tell me what the price of natural gas would have to get down to be able to compete with coal so that we wouldn't experience an increased cost for electric production, energy production?
Well, as you probably know,
Can you turn your microphone on, please?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Natural gas prices have fallen considerably in recent years, and they're now below $4 an MCF. When you get down to the $3 range, gas becomes very competitive with coal. I don't think we're going to get back down to $3, assuming the economy starts to grow. Assuming and if we can start getting into the business of exporting LNG, as I indicated earlier, that is going to increase demand and push up prices. So I don't think gas is likely to get down to the point where it's going to be competitive with coal. There are other advantages, obviously, that gas has, and certainly we have an abundance of gas, but all of the prognosticators that I look at see gas prices getting back up to the $5 to $7 range, which is kind of an okay place. It's good for producers. It's good for it doesn't really hurt consumers. Gas prices tend to be more volatile, a lot more volatile than coal prices. That's one of the downsides of relying on natural gas. So it's really hard to say, but I think coal will continue to be the cheapest power source for a long, long time.
Thank you. My time is up. I yield back. This is a great panel. I've got lots of questions over here. Mr. Kezar, with EPA's new standards that technologically can't even be reached, how are you going to do that? How do you anticipate being able to comply?
As I'd mentioned earlier, we can't comply. The
Well, if you
rate,
can't comply, they're gonna
EPA essentially established a rate. It's not a gross amount of tons of CO2 that can be emitted. It's a rate that's applied per megawatt hour of production. So even reducing output from the facility doesn't achieve the standard. Unless there is a technology that's commercially available that can be applied, we have really no hope of meeting it and continuing to consume the fuel that we mine at the plant.
So what's your alternative then? Shut down?
That's right.
So effectively, at some point in the near future here, you will shut the plant.
If the final regulations that are applied to existing facilities mirror the ones that were proposed in April of 2012, I don't see any other alternative.
Have you discussed with them some sort of waiver or some sort of extension of any kind?
No, sir. The rules for existing facilities have not yet been proposed.
Okay.
We're waiting to see those.
How many other plants around the country are in your position?
There are a lot of coal-fired plants.
Do you have a percentage,
There are.
roughly?
Well, I think we heard earlier that in excess of 40% of the power produced in this country comes from coal-fired facilities. There are no coal-fired facilities that can meet the EPA standard as it was proposed.
So we're going to have to replace 40% of our electrical production, energy production here shortly.
Unless some commercially available technology
Unless
is
the great
developed.
fiat EPA folks decide to do something different.
Yes.
Amazing. Mr. Gardner, just kind of curious, do you export any of your product at all?
Mostly what we provide is engineering services.
Engineering services? Okay.
We do have a small portion of our business that does software for engine health monitoring that we do export. We have international customers in Europe, and we do engineering work for them, so we have been able to bring large contracts from Europe into the United States to work those. So we have done that. But primarily our customers are the engine companies here in the United States.
Now, you mentioned small nuclear reactors a while ago.
Yes.
And that really piqued my interest because I've got a nuclear plant in my district, and they're competing for a small nuclear reactor grant to be able to develop, work with the government, and work with some other folks. There's 3 or 4 different companies that are doing this. You're probably more aware of than I am, to try and come up with ways and to use the spent fuel to go back and recycle it. Yes. And actually, get rid of the stuff and actually be a positive force. Can you explain a little about that? Are you familiar with that process? So you can enlighten us all a little bit. And
I can tell you a little bit about it. I don't want to get into the particular customer's intellectual property, but there is an enormous amount of spent military nuclear fuel, which only loses a small portion of its heat and effectiveness before it's not of a military grade anymore, and that's stored across the United States. The calculations for that is that the heat coming off of it now that the storage facilities have to dissipate and get rid of is an enormous amount that could be turned into effective electrical energy. And so these small modular nuclear reactors, at least this one particular idea, is to go take that, encase it safely in a way that is as safe as it is being stored now, and then use that heat to power turbine equipment to produce power. And that can be done very effectively. It requires a different cooling medium, and it does require some research to do it. But when it's done, you can then go put that in the ground for 30 years with the existing fuel and have it produce power.
What's the new, you said there's a new cooling medium that would be required. What would that be?
It's helium is the one that this customer is proposing.
Okay, right now it's water, right?
I'm not really familiar with all the other processes. It's the helium is something now that it's a gas, though, that you can actually run through a gas turbine engine. You can use that instead of air.
Very good. Professor Weinstein, I wish you'd really speak up and tell us what you really think. I appreciate your passion this morning, and I appreciate your comments. They've been very insightful, and you know, from your standpoint as an economist, I'm sure you'd like to see some cost-benefit analysis done on all the proposed rules each time. That way we would know how much it's going to cost our economy and our people with regards to jobs and the lack of competitiveness for Mr. Brown and Mr. Gardner here to be able to sell their products. So I certainly appreciate your testimony this morning, all of you as well. So with that, I'll yield back and thank the chairman for the committee or for the hearing this morning. And again, bemoan the fact that we don't have EPA here to listen to the fine testimony of these gentlemen, to be able to understand the unintended consequences of what their rules do to their businesses, their way of life, and the people of this country's way of life. Thank you very much.